So there is being because the human reality becomes being to us through our perception. And so man is the means by which things are manifested. So this is very simple, clear. Things are manifested. The world is manifested through man's consciousness. As I told you, gave you the example of the obliteration of humanity, and then what happens. So man's consciousness makes Dasein possible, or makes being possible. Thanks to us, the star which has been dead for millennia, that quarter moon and the dark river are disclosed in the unity of a landscape. So when somebody paints a landscape and paints a star and a moon and a river, now those things were there perhaps. We do not know. But the moment we know, that is, our consciousness works on them and perceives them, they come into existence. So in this landscape, painted by me or by somebody else, the star, the moon and the river, they come into existence because they have been mediated by the consciousness of the artist, of the man. So you see that Rabindranath also thought about this. Amari Chetonar Range Panna Holo Sobut. So who said that the emerald is green? The emerald didn't say it. The emerald didn't say that, no, I am blue, you are calling me green. So it is my consciousness by which I am making the emerald green. So if another animal has a different kind of perception, say suppose dogs can see only black and white, so for him the emerald, for a dog the emerald is not green. Therefore there is a different world for a dog and a different world for human beings, according to our perceptions. But the important thing is that the world comes into existence because we perceive it. Now, when I say that, then I am relying on phenomenology. That phenomena come to exist through consciousness, through perception. Heidegger also created his philosophy deriving largely from Husserl. Thanks to us, this star, it is the speed of our car and our aeroplane which organizes the great masses of the earth. With each of our acts, the world reveals to us a new face. So, if we have a very fast car, then the world that is revealed to us is different than if we have a bullock cart. So how we organize the world depends upon the way we work with the world, with our consciousness, with our technology, and so on and so forth, with each of our acts. If we turn away from this landscape, it will sink back into its dark permanence. At least it will sink back. Now, Heidegger has stopped here. After saying that it will sink back into its dark permanence, then he modifies himself. At least it will sink back. Because dark permanence was added by his imagination. Nobody knows where the world sinks back. Whether that is dark permanence, black permanence, or that is blue or yellow, nobody knows. So we believe that when there is no existence, nothingness is dark, that is a metaphor. So Sartre discusses the idea of being and nothingness in his book. We speak in metaphors. We always speak in metaphors. Why? Mainly because we know nothing. That is very simple. We know nothing. Now again, I am imposing upon you this almost Renaissance skepticism. He says, Montaigne had written, he says that was the motto of Renaissance skepticism. He says, what do I know? Now everybody is not a skeptic. If you are an Aristotelian, you will say, I know a lot of things. If you are a Platonist, then you will say, of course, God knows everything. But if you are a skeptic, You will say, what do I know? I'm not sure about anything. Okay, so there are different opinions, but what I was saying is that we mostly speak in metaphors because we do not know. Metaphor is the way of going around things. It is a kind of circumlocution. So when you do not know something clearly, then you beat around the bush. So then you use a lot of rhetorical figures, metaphors to conceal your ignorance. Now the poets, they mostly use metaphors, isn't it? Does that mean that they are the greatest fools? The most ignorant people? Or maybe they know something which is indescribable. Now, if the truth is 10-dimensional, for us 4-dimensional beings, we can't describe 10-dimensional things. Now, poets venture into those worlds, 9-dimension, 10-dimension, and they try to describe things from those dimensions, and that is why they use a lot of metaphors. One of the chief motives, to our inner certainty of being revealers is added that of being inessential in relation to the thing revealed. So we are revealers because of our consciousness, but what we reveal that does not affect the thing. That is, if I make a painting of rivers, moons and stars, the river, the moon and the stars are not affected by my painting, which means that I am inessential to them. So do not think for a moment that you are very important, you are very essential to the order of things. No, you are not. The world does not care. So we are revealers, but we are also inessential. One of the chief motives of artistic creation is certainly the need of feeling that we are essential in relationship to the world. So we, by intervening artistically or as a writer, we make ourselves important, or we want to feel that we are important in the scheme of the world. So by writing, we offer ourselves a place in the scheme of the world. If I fix on canvas or in writing a certain aspect of the fields or the sea, or a look on someone's face which I have disclosed, I am conscious of having produced them by condensing relationships, by introducing order where there was none, by imposing the unity of mind on the diversity of things. So what does the artist do? The artist discovers a relationship. The way Van Gogh paints nature, for example, the stars, the starry sky of the dark night. The painting reveals something. What does it reveal? The relationship of things. The particular relationship that can be seen in Van Gogh's painting cannot be seen anywhere else. Only Van Gogh discovered that relationship and expressed it in his painting. That is, I feel myself essential in relation to my creation, but this time it is the created object which escapes me. I cannot reveal and produce at the same time. So as I was saying, that the writer or the artist, he cannot judge his own work. So revealing is one thing, producing is another. The artist produces, the writer produces, but the reader reveals it. The spectator reveals the painting. It is the spectator who sees certain relationships in the painting. The artist is too close to it to draw those relationships or to interpret them. So the producer needs a collaborator. He cannot himself judge his work. The creation becomes inessential in relation to the creative activity. First of all, even if it appears finished to others, the created object always seems to us in a state of suspension. So, For an artist, a work is never finished. Why? To him, it always appears as work in progress. Whereas, to others, the work is a marvelous painting. Often, the spectator will not even notice the incomplete things or the incomplete strokes that are there. The artist knows them. The spectator does not see. The spectator sees the work as marvelous as it reveals a relationship to him which he has never before seen. The artist does not have this naivety, this innocence, to see freshly at his work. So, a novice painter asked his teacher, "When should I consider my painting finished?" And the teacher answered, "When you can look at it in amazement and say to yourself, I am the one who did that." That is a sense of fulfillment, a sense of completion and consequent wonder. The artist never has this sense of completion or amazement because he is always dissatisfied with his work. He knows that it can be perfected or something can be added. The spectator can reveal things which the artist does not see. So Mallarmé had said famously, that the meaning that you will give to it, that is the meaning. Now today we have many learned poets who interpret their own poetry or tell us the meanings of their poetry. Now they are nothing but learned fools because meaning the poet cannot give us any meaning of his work. Each reader has a meaning of his or her own. So these things are more elaborately discussed by Rolaba in his Death of the Author essay. That is one reason I never frequent, poetry reading sessions or this kind of workshop where poets interpret their works. Now you cannot be a poet and a learned person at the same time. Like I can perhaps be a learned person, I cannot be a poet at the same time. But if I am a poet and I write poetry and I read my poetry, at that moment I cannot be a learned person. And I cannot interpret my poem. That is the task of others. This is one reason that people, particularly here in our state, they think that everybody can write poetry. Because they do not realize the kind of investment that poetry requires, the kind of intelligence, the kind of emotional intelligence, phrase I think of T.S. Eliot, the perspicacity that is required in creating a work of art. So here everybody thinks that everybody can be a poet. So much so that one of our famous poets had to explain it. Jivanananda Das in his book of essays Kobitar Kotha wrote, "Sokolei kobi noy, keu keu kobi." Why did he have to write it? Because in Bengal everybody thinks that everybody is a poet. So, which amount to saying never. That is, for an artist, interpreting his work is never possible. Because he is too closely associated with the work and he does not have the required critical distance. For it is virtually considering one's work with someone else's eyes and revealing what one has created, but it is self-evident that we are proportionally less conscious of the thing produced and more conscious of our productive activity. When it is a matter of pottery or carpentry, we work according to traditional patterns with tools whose usage is codified. It is Heidegger's famous "they" who are working with our hands. So Heidegger suggested that when a potter creates a pot, it is not the potter who is creating, they are working with the hands of the potter. The result, in this case, the result can seem to a sufficient stage to preserve its objectivity in our eyes. So what are they? Which are they that work with our hands? Well, Heidegger is an idealist philosopher. So maybe he is talking about some, cosmic force, some cosmic intelligence, like Hegel thought that the world spirit manifests itself in this world, two different stages of perception. Perhaps it is they, the forces which work with our hands. We are mere instruments of these forces. In this case, the result can seem that it is seem to us sufficient strength to preserve its objectivity in our eyes. But if we ourselves produce the rules of production, the measures, the criteria, and if our creative drive comes from the very depths of our heart, then we never find anything but ourselves in our work. A highly creative artist creates his own rules of production, own criteria of art, and therefore he is so much in his art that he can only see himself. That is, the artwork cannot be objectified in his eyes. In order to judge something, you need to look at it as an object. But the artist is so much, merged in his consciousness with the work that he cannot separate the work from himself as an object. It is we who have invented the laws by which we judge it. It is our history, our love, our gaiety that we recognize in it. That is, as subjects, as artists, we see ourselves in our works of art. Even if we should look at it without touching it any further, we never receive from it that gaiety or love. We put them into it. The results which we have obtained on canvas or paper never seem to us objective. So it is not objective to the artist because the artist looks at it subjectively. He always finds his own subject in his work. We are too familiar with the processes of which they are the effects. That is, the artist is too familiar with the processes. These processes remain a subjective discovery. They are ourselves, our inspiration, our trick. And when we seek to perceive our work, create it again. When we seek to perceive our work, that is, can the artist perceive his work like a spectator? Of course he can, but then when he is perceiving, he is again recreating it. His subjectivity is again, working with it. Each of its aspects appears as a result. Thus, in the perception, the object is given as the essential thing and the subject as the inessential. So, in perception, that is when somebody is perceiving a work of art, then the object becomes the essential thing and the subject is the inessential. Now, you can clearly understand that for the artist or for the writer, it is very difficult for him or her to think of himself or herself in essential in his or her work. So, on the other hand, for a reader, the subject is inessential. The reader is not subjectively intertwined or enmeshed or closely related to his work. So the reader can look at a work as an object, as different from himself. So you see the application of phenomenological philosophy here, that being for ourselves means that as being we realize ourselves as subjects, and we realize the world as objects. Similarly, the reader looks at the work of art as different from him, as an object. This dialectic is nowhere more apparent than in the art of writing, but the literary object is a peculiar top which exists only in movement. Very clever formulation. The literary object is a top, like when young boys play with a top, throws it, they throw it, and then the top moves and balances itself. So the literary work can be perceived only when it is thrown by the reader, and the reader looks at its balance and its movement. Then the reader looks at it as a work of art. If he does not throw it away from him as an object, then he is too close to it. So the reader must objectify the work in order to perceive it. So when a top is in motion, it is balancing itself, then we perceive it as something that can balance itself in motion. We can objectify it before our eyes. To make it come into view, a concrete act of reading is necessary, and it lasts only as long as this act can last. So just like when a boy throws the top, so as long as the top is in motion, it is in front of him as an object in motion which can be perceived in its balance. Similarly, as long as we are in the act of reading, then we can objectify the literary work and we can perceive its balance or its qualities. Beyond that, there are only black marks on paper. That is, if there is no act of reading, then writing is nothing but black marks on paper. Now the writer cannot read what he writes, whereas this shoemaker can put on the shoes he has just made if they are his size, and the architect can live in the house he has built. So what is the difference between a writer and a shoemaker or an architect? The difference is that the writer cannot properly judge his work or cannot use his work as an object. But a shoemaker or an architect can use the work that he has created as an object, which means that Sartre emphasizes that a writer needs much more distance from his work than any other creator or any other artist or craftsman. He needs more distance. Why? Because the subjectivity of the writer is so much, it pervades the work so much that he cannot objectify it, which is probably not the case with other craftsmen like a shoemaker or an architect. Perhaps. One foresees the end of the sentence, the following sentence, the next page. The reader can always foresee, because the reader objectifies the work, is involved with it. One waits for them to confirm or disappoint one's foresights. That is how reading works. When we read something, we imagine what is going to be the end, and when the end tallies with what we are thinking, we are either happy, or if it does not tally, we are disappointed, and so on and so forth. That is, the reader constantly makes his projections onto the work of art. Readers are always ahead of the sentence. They are reading in a merely probable future, which partly collapses and partly comes together in proportion as the progress, which withdraws from one page to the next and forms the moving horizon of the literary object. So you see that the act of reading is a constant act of motion. The reader is moving from one page to another and imagining what is going to happen at the end of the chapter or at the end of the novel, and so on and so forth. It is this constant motion, like the motion of the top, that makes the whole work visible before the reader's eyes. He can project the work in the eyes of his imagination. Therefore, it is not that the writer's imagination only works on the work, but the reader's imagination works on the work and gives it meaning. Without waiting, without a future, without ignorance, there is no objectivity. So, beautiful formulation. Waiting. A reader is always waiting for the end. What is going to be the end? And the end will either satisfy him or disappoint him. So if this waiting is not there, then the work is not objectified. Future, that is, what is going to happen in the future in this book. Ignorance, the reader does not know, but he imagines or tries to imagine. So in this way, the reader actively engages with the work, and through his emotional, experience of satisfaction, disappointment, and so on, ignorance, knowledge, so on, he finds some meaning in that work. The operation of writing involves an implicit quasi-reading which makes real reading impossible. Quasi-reading. Because the writer, when he is writing, of course, reading also what he is writing, but it is not perfect reading, it is quasi-reading, which makes real reading impossible. When the words form under his pen, the author doubtless sees them, but he does not see them as the reader does, since he knows them before writing them down. So the writer has knowledge or foreknowledge what is going to happen. Even before the characters appear in his novel, the characters are in his mind, in his imagination. So this writer, even though he is temporarily reading his work, he can never be disappointed or satisfied in the way a reader can be. The function of his gaze is not to reveal, but brushing against them the sleeping words which are waiting to be read, but to control the sketching of the signs. So the writer controls his writing, and he writes with signs. Now I will not go into this. Again, this is the realm of Rolla Barthes. Reading works of literature as signs, semiotics. The other great French development in the area of linguistics and linguistic interpretation. Sartre does not engage in that kind of linguistic interpretation, but he is aware, because all these other writers of theory, they were around him. So in chapter 1, he writes that prose is an empire of science. Now that is the exact phrase that Rolla Barthes made the title of one of his books. When Rolla Barthes returned from Japan, he wrote a book called The Empire of Science. Rolla Barthes was of course highly influenced by Sartre, but again, he is very original. So he hopped from one theory to another, continually changing his theoretical stance. So he began as a structuralist, then became a post-structuralist, then became a postmodernist, and a semiotics here. I am always digressing, but well, these are French writers who influence one another. What can I do? In short, it is a purely regulating vision, and the view before him reveals nothing except for slight slips of the pen. The writer neither foresees nor conjectures, he projects. So, as I was saying, that foreseeing means that the reader is imagining what is going to happen. Conjecture, same thing, that imagining things to happen or guessing. But the writer does not have to guess, because the writer is a knower, he knows what is going to happen. He is the creator of his work. So the writer projects. What does he project? Projects his consciousness, his subjectivity on his work. And therefore, what does the reader do? The writer formulates the codes, the reader decodes them. If we talk in the language of structuralism, structuralism interprets literary works in terms of codes. The object he creates is out of reach, he does not create it for himself. If he rereads himself, it is already too late. The sentence will never quite be a thing in his eyes, he goes to the very limits of the subjective, but without crossing it. So the writer can never cross the limits of his subjectivity, because he is so much attached to his work as a subject. He puts everything into the work as a subject of the work. He is the creator, he is the subject. He puts his subjectivity into the work, and he may try to read the work, but he can never completely forget his subjectivity, and therefore he can never reach the kind of objectivity which is required to interpret a work. Proust never discovered the homosexuality of Charlus, remembrance of things past. And if it comes on the book, since he had decided upon it even before starting on his book. So the reader of Proust's work, after reading many chapters, can reach or come to the interpretation that the character Charlus is homosexual. But Proust cannot make this discovery, because Proust knew. He is the creator, he is the writer. If it comes when the book takes on for its author a semblance of objectivity, it is because years have passed, because he has forgotten it, because its spirit is quite foreign to him, and doubtless he is no longer capable of writing it. So if an author or a poet reads something that he wrote years back, then what does he do? He has lost the subjective connection with his work. He wrote it long back. So he behaves like a reader. And poets often use words or quotations from earlier works in later works. That is behaving like a reader. Just like any reader will be influenced by a poem, the poet sometimes is influenced by a poem that he wrote long back, many years back. So at that time, he has lost the subjective connection with the poem or the work. So its spirit is quite foreign to him, and doubtless he is no longer capable of writing it. This was the case with Rousseau when he reread the social contract at the end of his life. What happened to Rousseau? I do not know. Sartre says that at the end of his life, he reread his work, The Social Contract. And then he probably found it to be somebody else's work. He forgot it, most probably. Now that happens. Before a writer dies, he may become, a victim of Alzheimer, or he may just become senile. And then if you produce a book, a very bright book that you produced years back, then he will be like a foreigner to it. Won't even remember that he wrote it once upon a time. And that sometimes happens with writers and poets when they look at their past. Oh, did I write it? Marvelous! How could I write such a beautiful poem? And so on and so on. So he has lost that, proximity, the spiritual proximity to the world. Thus, it is not true that one writes for oneself. That would be the worst blow. In projecting one's emotions on paper, one barely manages to give them a languid extension. The creative act is only an incomplete and abstract moment in the production of a work. So what is Sartre saying? That what a writer does is always incomplete and is never satisfactory. The expression is never languid enough. Hardly manages to give it a languid extension, that is, he is never satisfied. Now, which writer is satisfied with his work? No sane writer is satisfied with his work. Because every writer thinks that he tried his best, but it is still not perfect. Therefore, this work needs to be perfected. It needs to be made meaningful with interpretation, which is the task of a reader, which a reader can do. The work as object will never see the light of day, and you either have to put down his pen or despair. If the author existed alone, he would be able to write as much as he liked. Now, that is the hypothetical case that a writer is writing only for himself. Imagine that you are in Bastille, you are imprisoned in Bastille for the rest of your life, and you are writing something. Now, it is possible that what you write there, after your death, it is posthumously published and it becomes a famous work. But as long as you are alive, it is not meaningful. It is incomplete. So the writer puts down his pen in despair. What does it mean? That a writer can never write for himself. It is, even if a writer is, physically isolated, incarcerated, even then he imagines the readers who will read his work. Only then he can continue. So, writing, therefore, Sartre says, is not a sole or solo act. It is always a collaborative act. But the operation of writing implies that of reading as its dialectical correlative and these two connected acts necessitate two distinct agents. So, Sartre moves dialectically from the role of the writer to the role of the reader, and suggests that this dialectic also operates in a work. The dialectic is that a work becomes meaningful when two agents act on a work. One is the writer and the other is the reader. Which means that in order for a work to become an object of interpretation, two consciousnesses must work on it. One is that of the writer, the other is that of the reader. Two agents must take up the work from two sides. There is no art except for and by others. Very succinctly put, but significant, pronunciation. Art by others. We are used to the expression that art for others. But art by others, that is an addition. Which means that art cannot be created solo, unless others or other consciousnesses also work on the art and interpret it. So a work of art has two ends. One is the creative end, the other is the reading. Literature, on it, different agents work, the writer and the reader. Now, you can realize that this is the embryo of the thought that, in postmodern times, after Barthes, Michel Foucault wrote What is an Author? So Barthes wrote the essay Death of the Author, and Foucault wrote the essay What is an Author? And the author in postmodern times has stopped becoming the idea of a person. Author has become now the author function. So the author function is the postmodernist way of looking at the idea of the author. The author is not the sole creator of the work of art from a postmodernist point of view. Roland Barthes in The Death of the Author says that it is the reader who participates in the work of giving a text meaning. So these are much more developed elaboration of the idea, which is a germ here in this essay. The idea that the author and the author's subjectivity is not is not capable of giving a work its full value as a meaningful work. So value is created from both ends, from the end of the writer and the end of the reader. So Sartre presents this idea in a, you may say, like the germ of this idea, that writing is an act of collaboration. So when we later read Barthes and Foucault, then we realize that this idea now has fully developed, and we now are able to theoretically, tear apart the notion of the author as creator. Roland Barthes destroys the author of the status of author as creator, Barth says that if you imagine the author is a creator like God, and like God gives meaning to this work, to this world, and author gives meaning to his work. If you believe that, then you are creating a theology of literature. No, it's not like that. So the idea that writing is a social act, that idea is present here in Sartre, that it is an act of collaboration between the writer and the reader. Now we all know that this line of thought developed so much, like the reader response theory, that also prioritizes the reader. The reader response theory developed in principally in America and Britain, in the Anglophone world, whereas in the French Francophone world we have the linguistic theories of structuralism and post-structuralism that made the reader important and that refused to prioritize the author. Reading seems, in fact, to be the synthesis of perception and creation. The same is true in different degrees regarding the spectator's attitude before other works of art, paintings, symphonies, statues, etc. Sartre provides a note to this, that not only reading, music, sculpture, painting, in all these different kinds of art we see that there must be a synthesis of perception and creation. Now, perception obviously here is referring to the perception by the reader, registration or registering of the work of art in the reader's consciousness. If you remember the phenomenological notion, that perception, it is through perception in our consciousness that we come to know the world, and the world comes to exist for us. And creation obviously refers to the writer's act or the artist's act of creation. Now, we can further add footnotes to this. Sartre added one footnote, but I can add another. And I can say that you may disagree with me if I say that perception and creation can be seen both in the writer and the reader. Will you fight with me? So if I say that yes, of course, perception according to phenomenological theory, it is the reader's perception of the work of art that gives it existence. But before the work could be created, didn't the writer perceive it? Right. Similarly, of course, the work of art is the creation of the author or the artist, but does not the reader or the spectator also create it by adding his imagination, adding his interpretation, adding his subjectivity? But so there, if I add this footnote, then you may either fight with me or you may fight with Sartre. Or you may not fight. If you are docile, then you will not fight. I am sorry I cannot give you the opportunity of talking here. So I was just thinking of Ben Johnson's play Silent Woman, and now here I have so many silent women. But I know that you are not silent at all. Given a chance, you would have, vociferously protested whatever I have been saying, protested against you. But unfortunately here, it is technology which is dominating you, it is not me. Or you say the fault in technology dominates you. So I have to improve my technology here so that it gives you more freedom and dominates you less. So it is a synthesis of perception creation. What is a synthesis? Reading. It supposes the essentiality of both the subject and the object. Now you see why does Sartre use the word essential, inessential, essentiality so many times? Because according to existential philosophy, existence precedes essence. So existential philosophy is opposed to essentialism. What is essentialism? Idealist philosophy. Existential philosophy is a mix of communistic ideas and phenomenology and Heidegger. And therefore, Sartre is against idealism, against essentialism. So essentialist, we always oppose essentialism because it is often blind, often one-sided, often fascist. For example, the idea of purity. Say in the Brahmanical tradition, there is a great emphasis on the idea of purity. That is essentialist. Because when there is nothing pure in this world, you invent this idea of purity in order to dominate people. You say some people are impure. But we know that there is nothing pure in this world. Everything is impure. So it is essentialism. Essentialism is always false. It is a dogma. Its purpose is to dominate others. It is a fascist kind of thought. Okay. So in existentialism, existence has priority. Existence precedes essence. So Sartre says that the writer, his subjectivity is essential, and the object or the work of art is inessential. That is, the writer cannot objectify the work of art because of the essentiality of his subject. For the reader, the work of art has the essentiality. As an object, the reader's subjectivity is not essential. But since the act of reading is a synthesis of perception and creation, therefore it supposes essentiality both of the subject and the object. So as I was saying that the act of reading is a collaborative act between writer and reader. The writer facilitates the act of reading because he writes something to read in the first place. And the reader participates in the act of reading and thus collaborates with the writer. The reader gives the finishing touch by interpreting it, by deriving its meaning. And therefore, both subject and object are essential to the act of reading. Yeah. The object is essential because it is strictly transcendent, because it imposes its own structures, and because one must wait for it and observe it. Here you see the philosophical application of the word essential. What is essential? The essence is transcendent. Just like I gave you the example of purity. Can you grasp purity in your hand? It is transcendent. It is, a construct, imaginary construct. So, the work of art as an object is transcendent because it imposes its own structures and because one must wait for it and observe it. That is, the reader cannot dominate the work of art with his subjectivity. It is transcendent, it will go beyond him. The reader has to discover the structure of the work of art. Now, Sartre is not a structuralist, but nobody has given the structuralist the sole right to use the word structure. Is there any legal need that only the structuralist can use this word? No. So Sartre uses this word, that the reader must discover the structure of the work. The structure of the work is transcendent. Transcendent means it is not created by the reader, it is beyond him. Therefore, in that sense, it is an essence, it is essential. So the reader has to wait and observe. But the subject is also essential because it is required not only to disclose the object, that is to make it possible for there to be an object, but also so that this object might exist absolutely. So without the subject, there is no object. Because who is going to know the object without a knower? Without cognition, there can be nothing. So you are there face to face with an ant. You do not exist because the ant does not know you. The ant cannot recognize you. So at that moment you do not exist. So in order for existence to become possible, there has to be a subjectivity, there has to be a consciousness. Therefore, subjectivity is also essential. That is, the essence of the subject makes the object possible. And so who produces the work of art? The writer? No. He only partly produces it. The work of art is produced by the reader's consciousness. It exists because the reader's consciousness is there. Therefore, it is essential. In reality, it is not necessary to believe that reading is a mechanical operation and that science makes an impression upon him as light does on a photographic plate. Reading is not mechanical, that is, it is not like a process, say a light falls on a photographic plate and immediately the image is created on the photographic plate because the light falls on it. So that is a natural process, a mechanical process. But reading is not like that. If he is inattentive, tired, stupid or thoughtless, which most of the readers are, then most of the relations will escape him. That is what happens to most of the texts that we are reading. Much of the texts escape us. The relationships escape us because we are stupid, tired and so on and so forth. So we are not machines. Like the light falls on us, we are not photographic plates. The light falls on us, the alphabets of the work fall on us, and immediately it is registered on us like a photographic plate. Because we might be sleeping, we might be dozing, we might be napping, or we might be thinking of somebody, and so on and so forth. So, readers are imperfect machines. So as reading machines, we are imperfect. Which means that there is an element of chance, isn't it? Sartre is lucky that he got some intelligent readers, but another author might be unlucky. He got only stupid readers. So there is an element of chance. So you may write something very bright, very brilliant, but if you get only stupid readers, then it is not registered in anybody's consciousness. Okay. Alright, so I think we have crossed our time, so I'll stop here. I am sorry I didn't give any time for questions, but if you have any quick questions, you can ask. Oh, how will you ask? Okay, you have to write in the chat box.